Hello, CFUV listeners. My name is Jason Grenier, and welcome to another edition of Climate Jam, a series of interviews on solutions to climate change. If you are interested in pursuing the kinds of topics discussed on this program, please visit the BC Sustainable Energy Association's website, bcsea.org, where you'll find a wealth of information on sustainability and the latest events on the subjects that are taking place in BC. Today I have with me Thomas Teuwen, who, along with his partner Laura Parker, built a home in Sydney, BC called The Biggest Little House in Sydney, which was designed to have a small carbon footprint by using a construction process with zero waste, keeping the house small, and using the land to grow most of what they eat. Thomas and Laura want people to know that sustainability is possible anywhere. For that reason, they run an eco vacation at their home where people can get in touch with nature and learn to live sustainably. I met Thomas and Laura in April at the BC Sustainable Energy Association's monthly meeting, which is open to the public. At this meeting, they spoke about their trip to Germany. They visited the community of Wildpoldsreid, and I'll let Thomas pronounce that properly later, where they learned how this community generates 4 times the amount of energy they need through wind, solar, and the extraction of gas from the manure of farm animals. The definition of what this German community is doing is called community-supported energy production, which is a system where everyone in the community makes money and produces clean energy at the same time. It is a win-win social strategy that somehow has not made it to North America yet. So thank you for joining me, Thomas.
Thank you.
First of all, I just would like to talk about your trip to Germany. Could you tell us about what you saw, what was interesting?
Well, we first heard about Wildpoldsreid, and it is a hard thing to pronounce, from a movie, a documentary actually, called Powerful, that showcased a number of different initiatives around the world to produce energy in a community setting. And when we had the opportunity to go to Germany last December, we thought it would be great to stop by and take a look for ourselves how this was done. And so we arranged for a meeting with the deputy mayor, who spent the day with us and toured us through the entire village and showed us exactly what they did.
How did they generate all this energy?
Well, what struck us first was that the presentation of the mayor and the mayor's attitude towards sustainable energy was very pragmatic. It was basically saying what we do in this community is we get together and we look for better ways of doing things. And if somebody has a good idea, we discuss it at town council. And if we all agree it's a good idea, we just implement it. We don't waste a lot of time. It's a farming community. Everybody is innovative, and everybody's used to producing things already. They produce food, and there are a lot of craftspeople in the area that produce other things, welders and electricians and so on and so forth, tradespeople. So the mindset is already in production mode, unlike most of society nowadays where we just simply consume, and we don't really focus in on producing anything or giving anything back to our social structure.
So basically, it is true that they are producing energy, and the remark was four times more than they need?
Actually, Wildpoldsreid was successful in producing 5 times as much electricity as they consume, and it's growing. Every year they produce more. So, and they also produce about 60% of all the heat that they consume to heat the place in the winter, the village in the wintertime. They do it by a combination of wind, solar, and biogas. And the biogas is generated primarily from bioreactors. And the key that they've developed there, or the key technology that they've employed, and none of this technology, by the way, is new. It's all off-the-shelf stuff. And what they did is they used cogeneration, which is something that we don't seem to employ a lot in North America, to squeeze every last kilowatt from their biogas, for example. And cogeneration I thought was a brilliant approach. Because, as most people don't realize, when you drive your car, for example, 80% of the fuel you burn in your car produces heat. Only 20% moves you forward. It's a colossal waste of energy. That's why electric cars are so good, because they reverse that equation. Well, if you do cogeneration in a biogas environment, what you're doing is you're capturing 100% of the energy, some as heat and some as electricity. And like the deputy mayor of Wildpoldsreid likes to say, it makes no sense to burn fuel to produce heat. If you produce electricity, you get the heat for free.
I think we know a lot about solar. We know a lot about wind, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about those. But I want to get to why should we be talking about community-supported energy production, which is what they're doing in that community.
Well, community-supported energy is a concept that really comes from the notion of, or addresses, I should say, it's a concept that addresses the whole NIMBY syndrome. There's two reasons why we don't have a lot of alternative energy happening in our world. One of them is certainly there's a lot of people that are opposed to it based on, oh, gee, I don't want to see this in my backyard kind of thing. And for us, it was, and again, a very interesting experience, majestic almost, to actually stand underneath a wind turbine, directly underneath a wind turbine, and not hear it. It was turning in the wind, and we couldn't hear it. We could hear our footsteps in the snow, but we couldn't hear the wind turbine. There's a lot of misinformation that happens, and that is driven by the traditional way of producing energy, which is that a large corporation or a government agency comes in, makes a decision to create a mega project, and then the citizens have to live with the consequences, whatever those consequences are. It could be environmental degradation, it could be high transmission lines, it could be fracking, damaging water tables. Whatever the consequences are, the citizens are just sitting passively by and dealing with those consequences. Community-supported energy turns that on its head and says, no, what we need to do is we need to drill for oil in our backyard. Well, we can't drill for oil in our backyard, okay? But we can essentially run windmills in our backyard. We can run bioreactors in our backyard. We can run solar panels in our backyard. So now we become producers. The citizens become producers. And once we become producers, we understand all the complexities of the issues. We start to understand the complexities of the issues. We start to marry all the technology, marry the know-how, marry the skill set that exists in our community with the initiative to actually make things happen, to actually start producing things. And that's what was so exciting about Wildpoldsreid. Because when we went there, we went to the local tavern to have lunch, and the farmers all knew why we were there, and they all talked to us about sustainable energy, right? And one of the farmers said to us, well, we've been producing energy our whole lives, except it's called calories. Okay, now we're producing kilowatts. What's the difference? It's still energy that's harvested originally from the sun, and we're just making it available in a different form.
I'm glad you stood under that windmill, because I think one of the biggest arguments about windmills is the noise, and you just told us that it doesn't create any noise, right? And I think in your presentation you mentioned that even at full speed, the windmill doesn't make any more noise than the wind blowing across the trees.
Well, I think that's something that you can't make that sort of standard statement, okay? Because how much noise does a car make? Well, it depends on the car. It depends on the muffler system. It depends on the technology. It depends on how old the car is. It depends on 100 variables. Same thing goes for wind turbines. The other thing is that wind turbine technology is still evolving. So if you look at a wind turbine that was installed 10, 15 years ago, well, it's going to be a whole different technology than what's available now. Now they have hydraulic drives, whereas they used to have gear drives. Well, that changes the whole noise situation, right? They angle the blades differently so that the blades are quieter than they used to be. So the technology is evolving. And, of course, somebody had to invest in windmills at the beginning in order to drive the technology and allow it to evolve, and that's a price you pay. But you can't judge a whole industry based on the prototypes, essentially, that happened in the beginning.
Now, your trip to Germany was to visit this community that's totally self-sufficient with no help from the government. How did this community get organized to do this? Because it seems in North America to get organized to do anything is quite a task.
Well, to be fair, when we say no help from the government, that's an interpretive thing. What they are certainly self-reliant. They're certainly driven by their own initiative. They did work in conjunction with government and the universities and Siemens to develop an example or a prototype for a smart grid that is employed now across Germany. Okay, in fact, just recently, Germany produced at a peak moment, produced 75% of its entire energy requirement, electrical energy requirement, from sustainable wind, solar, and biomass. So they have the ability now to deal with the fluctuations in energy that is generated by sustainable energy production, partly because of the kind of prototype work that Wildpoldsreid did. So they have a good partnership with government. Okay, they're not sort of standing apart from government. And there's another aspect about Germany that we're not participating in, and that is that Germany recognizes that this is a new technology that needs to be encouraged. The whole sustainable energy technology area needs to be encouraged. So they have made it a policy to put in feed-in tariffs, which is basically a way of kickstarting an industry. The consumers in Germany pay for that, obviously, through their energy bills, okay, as do the consumers in Ontario now. Whereas here in BC, we're still saying, oh, well, we don't need to do that. You know, we just wait until somebody else does that and develops the technology, and then we'll ride on their coattails and use the cheap technology when it suits us. Right? But somebody, I remember that from the computer world, somebody had to buy those first computers that were $10,000 a piece in order for us to have our iPads now. You need to develop the technology. There has to be early innovators and early adopters. Well, it's a good role for government to encourage, if they want a technology to move forward, to encourage those early innovators and early adopters to step forward and participate in the development of that technology. And we're just not doing that here in BC.
Right. And maybe some of the reasons why we're not doing that is these arguments. I guess one of the first arguments you were saying earlier was we can't put up windmills, we can't do solar, we can't do biomass unless it's subsidized, right?
Well, subsidization is an interesting topic, and I think it's worth exploring a little bit. In Wildpoldsreid, there was a community determination, a community incentive, community initiative, I should say, to make something happen. And subsidies ultimately are always paid for by the consumer. And subsidies are regulated by political bodies. So if the consumer is totally hell-bent on any kind of subsidy, then the political body is not going to start pushing for it. Okay? In Germany, there was a reason why consumers wanted alternative energy, because they wanted energy independence. Okay? If we have likewise a need in this province or in North America to have energy independence and or energy security through sustainability, then we also have a social need to make that happen. And that's what makes the door open for government policies that encourage the industry, like we mentioned earlier. I think it's important to recognize that it's a mechanism that is in place, has been in place in the oil industry since the get-go. There were decisions made about building an automobile industry. There was decisions made about building a freeway system. There was decisions made about exploring for and exporting oil as energy. And these were all decisions that were made by the society as a whole, supported by the community, and implemented by government and business. And the same thing can happen in sustainable energy. And that is, I think, the whole key to community-supported energy. If we sit back and wait for governments and business to take the lead on this, anyone who has risen to a level of success within government and business is inherently invested in the status quo. They have no intrinsic need, they have no incentive to change that status quo and come up with a new energy economy. So to drive a new energy economy requires the will of the citizenry, and community-supported energy production actually engages the citizenry and helps them understand all these issues and helps to drive the social agenda and the discussion in the community about how to resolve these issues and actually start moving towards a new energy economy.
That's a very good point. Now, my second argument is we don't need these wind energy, windmills and solar panels and all this other stuff because we got hydro. So we got clean energy already. So what would you have to say about that?
Well, I think that's essentially a very parochial attitude. Yes, we have hydro, but it's a very limited, finite resource. And if we're going to continue to expand North America-wide as far as our energy consumption, if we become a net green energy exporter, okay, a lot of the cheap energy that surrounds us geographically is not generated by sustainable means. If we become a net green energy exporter, we can do with green energy what Quebec Hydro did with hydro energy. And we can start exporting our energy, or what Alberta did with oil. We can start exporting our energy to the surrounding jurisdictions using a smart grid that actually can move that energy long distances and effectively.
Can we actually do this here? Like, say we have a community, say 10 people got organized, and they were going to be an exploratory committee on community-supported energy production, and say they wanted to put up a windmill, and they found a farmer, and they needed to rent a small plot of land off the farmer's land to put up this windmill, and which is good for the farmer because he gains a little bit of rent, and he could still farm up to the windmill. It doesn't cause a problem for his farmland. And say they got the community that lives around this windmill to invest in this windmill, and therefore getting over the problem of people opposing it in their community because they're not going to oppose it if they invested in it. Is this kind of idea, is that possible here in the southern Vancouver Island area?
I guess we'll never know until we try. I think that's the model that happens in Germany all the time. It happens in other parts of the world. It's something that we are capable of doing here. We certainly have the technological know-how. We certainly have the skill set. We have the expertise. We have access to the windmills, and we have a standing offer from BC Hydro. So it's really just a matter of forming that steering committee that you mentioned and having people engaged in the activity of bringing a community together with this idea in mind.
Okay, well, with that said, we're fast running out of time, so I just want to end off with this. We know we are in a jam when it comes to the climate. So, what do? We can beat our heads on the wall waiting for governments to prepare and plan, but they're not very good at preparing and planning anyways. That is why a solution is going to have to come from a community level. Let's invest our energy in a positive way in our own communities to make them more resilient. The German community we are talking about is all about humans investing their energy in communities in which they live to do really positive work. We can do this too. And the first step is to create an exploratory committee in community-supported energy production. If you are interested in starting such a committee, go to my website, climatejam.ca, and send me an email. I will put everyone interested in touch. Thomas, what do you think? Do you have anything to add to that idea?
I think that would be a great initiative, and I hope that people will actually take it seriously. I would paraphrase, if I can't quote her directly, Margaret Mead: never doubt that a small group of people with determination and commitment can change the world. Nothing else ever has. I think that this is very important to bring the community together, if nothing else than to understand the complexity of energy and to take command again of the process of energy production and not just consumption.
All right, well said. Well, there's a lot to talk about on this subject, but we're out of time. So, Thomas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jason.
All right, Thomas, what I want to ask you about your trip to Germany is quite interesting. You mentioned that you asked for some information from one of the community leaders, and he didn't want to give you this information because he gave it to some other media outlet, and they twisted the story and turned it upside down and made it sound like the community was failing in their energy endeavor. So could you tell us about that?
Well, actually, his beef was that the story, which was done by the Financial Times, made it sound like they were all on the dole, and that it was all only possible because of huge subsidies. And in fact, their wind contracts that they're signing right now are for 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And so while there were feed-in tariffs at the beginning of the technological development in wind, feed-in tariffs by their very nature reduce over time. And so now they're signing contracts at a very low rate, and since they continue to reduce, their wind energy, as they sign contracts from here on out, is going to continue to be cheaper and cheaper. And I think that what happens is that there's a lot of misinformation that gets generated by people who have invested a lot in the traditional energy sector to try to discourage this, because in the end, wind is extremely profitable. And it's way more economically viable than, for example, the tar sands. But there's so much inertia on that other front that wind becomes a real threat. And so there's a lot of misinformation that gets generated.
So you were saying that with putting up a windmill, you can get 20% return?
Well, in Germany, what they were able to do right now on their new windmill installations, wind turbine installations, they get between about 10 and 25% return on their investment as citizens. We don't know exactly what the numbers would look like here, but I'm a business person and I love crunching numbers. And one of the things that I did is just by taking sort of rough information from all the areas that I could gather it, I came up with the fact that here in BC, it's not at all impossible for us to generate similar returns on a wind turbine. The technology has come really far. The wind turbines are pretty affordable. The numbers work for the big corporations. There are some big wind farms going up. And just like a co-op doesn't have to generate the same kind of return on investment that General Motors does or that that Exxon does. So a community-supported energy initiative doesn't have to create the same kind of return that Suncor does. And so therefore, when we hear whether wind is economically viable here or not, we hear it through the lens of a big corporation and not necessarily through the lens of a community-driven organization. So I think that it requires some work. It requires some understanding of exactly what the wind opportunities are and where they are. The farmers would love this because, of course, we're giving them another source of revenue. But it does require a paradigm shift on behalf of, for example, the Land Conservancy, because right now there is no opening for farmers to do anything but farm. And ironically, we support horse farms as being okay on Land Conservancy land, but we don't support things like windmill or biogas generation, anaerobic biogas reactors, which are literally a farming kind of support mechanism, whereas horse farms aren't. Horse farms just drive the price up of farmland. And so, again, we need to, this is the beauty of Wildpoldsreid, the example of Wildpoldsreid. What they did is the community came together and addressed all these issues and all these conflicts and all these contradictions and said, well, how do we make this work? What do we need to do as a community to get together and understand all this stuff? So I understand what your concerns are and you understand what my concerns are. And we come up with a win-win solution where all those concerns are met. And that kind of sort of team approach to problem solving doesn't seem to be the norm here. Everybody has their little thing and their little problem and their little concern and their thing that they are for or against, and we sort of divide ourselves up into these, sort of camps rather than realizing that, hey, we're all in this together. We need to find a common solution to a common problem.
If a community were to do this financially, who's gonna, say you got 300 people each investing $5,000, so that's $1.5 million to put up a windmill. And this was from your presentation. You said it would cost about that much to erect one.
I got to stop you there because that's not quite accurate. There's a lot of numbers floating around, so it's hard to keep them all straight. But basically, a windmill, sources tell me that a windmill here on the peninsula to erect will cost anywhere between $1 and $2 million per megawatt. And on average, the new technology windmills from Enercon are about 2 to 3 megawatt. Is what you're looking at. So you're looking at a maximum between about $4 million worth of windmill for a 2 megawatt installation. That to finance $4 million, a $1.5 million down payment or equity investment, as it's known in the business, would be sufficient to then finance the rest of it, especially since there would be a contract, a 20-year contract with BC Hydro that guarantees payment for any wind that's produced. Okay, so that's the business model. It's not all equity on behalf of the owner. There's some financing involved, but if you put 300 people together at $5,000 each on the table, you can generate $1.5 million worth of that equity investment. That's substantial, and that, I think, it goes a long way to actually starting the ball rolling and making things happen.
And would one of the big, the corporate banks finance something like this, or would you go to a credit union, or would you need some other financial institution to?
So here we are, two people trying to solve those kind of problems and answer those kind of questions. The beauty of community-supported energy is that you don't have two people, you now have 300 people. 300 people of engineers and accountants and lawyers and bankers and everybody in the community that is sitting together and saying, hey, we want to make this happen. How do we do that? Okay, how do we make sure the community retains control of this? How do we structure it? Who invests in it? How do we get the financing? All that can be worked out. That's the beauty of community-supported energy. And I also want to make a point here. It's not just about wind. It's not, it doesn't matter whether it's wind or solar or biogas or what it is. The key is that you bring the community on side. Biogas is actually probably a much more viable and accessible technological development here right now. Because biogas is something we now have this new collection system of organic waste from our households that we're shipping off island. Okay, hopefully temporarily, but still, that is energy in the raw. If we start going to anaerobic reactors and distribute those around the peninsula or around the region, right, we can actually generate a lot of biogas that produces heat and electricity from what other people call waste. And one of the things, I'm getting a little excited here again because the experience at Wildpoldsreid was so powerful to us. The experience was so encouraging because when you look at biogas, for example, the big problem that people have with biogas, not in my backyard, is because it has a reputation. Composting has a reputation of creating this smell and this unsightly and unclean situation in your area. A biogas reactor is totally self-contained. It takes whatever the organic waste is, which could be manure, it could be kitchen compost, it could be all kinds of organic matter, and it composts it or decomposes it in a slurry in a sealed environment. And it captures the methane. Well, the methane is essentially the stink. So what you're doing is you're taking a waste product, you capture the stink, and you burn that in your cogeneration units, and then you give the manure or the raw fertilizer back to the farmer, and it doesn't smell anymore. And they spread it on the fields. So now the farmer wins because he gets manure that the neighborhood isn't going to be upset about. The bioreactor operator wins because he gets to sell his gas to a municipality or somebody who turns it into electricity and heat. And the municipality wins because they now have a market for their compost collection stuff.
So are you saying that when people are driving through the country and sometimes you go through this area and you get this stink coming through the windows, that's the fertilizer, and you're saying that if we
fuel being wasted.
If we took the smell, the energy out of it, we wouldn't smell that when we
Correct.
go on a...
That's the whole idea.
Wow.
Okay, and
That'd
so
be nice.
to me it's a no-brainer. And when these people do that in Germany, one of the things that happens in Germany too that's different from us here, and this is where community engagement can change it again. We compartmentalize our life, our society. So businesses over there, residents over here, and farms are over here. We segregate them. Okay, like we used to do with races and we used to do with social classes. That's not the modern world, right? In Europe, they have recognized that farms go right up to people's houses all over the place. And we have some of that going on here on the peninsula, but there's always that rivalry, that friction between them. When you start creating community-supported energy where everybody realizes, hey, we're in this together, we can do things so that everybody's concerns are being addressed. The farmer makes more money on the land because he can run a bioreactor plant. The resident doesn't have to put up with the stink, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now everybody starts winning, and if the municipalities get involved and they start making some money at it too, which is a big no-no in our society. Why should municipalities be allowed to make money? I think they should. Why? Because it reduces our property taxes. So why wouldn't they take a piece of the action in all these things, right? So that they actually earn some extra income, which then helps to reduce property taxes. It's a mind shift. It's a whole different approach to actually creating solutions rather than protesting against problems.
Is there an urgency to start this now? I heard a big speech about peak oil this past weekend, and if we get the parts now, this technology now, I would assume the windmill technology, the solar, and I don't know much about the technology, but I would imagine all the spare parts and everything would be coming from overseas, probably Europe. Wouldn't it be cheaper to do it now, to get stuff now and get up and running now than waiting for peak oil to come and then all of a sudden the prices just... Because you need oil to actually start this program to erect these windmills and get all this started, right?
Well, that's an interesting point. I'm not sure anymore that you do. I used to think that too, but at this moment in time, there is so much neat technology out. For example, even the village in Wildpoldsreid, and there's a local company here on the peninsula that does the same thing, that's investigating this technology, which is to take, and I'm not a chemist, so I'm not 100% sure on the chemistry of this, but apparently if you take CO2 and merge it with hydrogen, which you can generate through wind power, you create methane, which you then can burn again in a cogeneration unit. Okay, so that there's a mechanism there where you can actually also create transportation fuels and gasoline replacements with wind power. And there's a company here on Vancouver Island that is actually at the forefront of developing that technology. So there are a lot of ways of doing this. The question that you ask about whether we need oil to get this whole thing started at this point in time, we still live in an oil economy. There's no confusion about that. And peak oil, to me, is a bit of a, let me put it another way, if we keep going, it's a bit of a red herring. If we go to the extent of where peak oil becomes a problem, running out of oil will be the least of our problems. Okay, because ocean acidification and climate change are going to cook our goose before then. And there's still a lot of oil in the ground. It may not be cheap oil, it may not be easily accessible oil, but there's still a lot of oil in the ground. And and the oil companies want to burn every last drop of it. And if we do, I don't think our future bodes very well for our children.
So the real urgency is climate change. It's not that we're going to run out of oil. It's It's what oil is going to do to our climate.
And it's not just our climate. And a little plug here for something that is not really on the radar screen yet in the public discourse, and that is ocean acidification. Ocean acidification is the evil twin of climate change, and we haven't even begun to explore the horrific impacts of ocean acidification on our civilization.
Well, I have heard reports about different types of species showing up in our BC waters that used to hang out further south. So I have heard a little bit about that, and that's a topic for another day. But anyways, that's enough for today, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess. Yeah.